Great. So for those of us that are not familiar with California Volunteers and the Californians for All initiative, can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what you guys are trying to do?
California Volunteers is a really unique organization within the governor's office in California, focused solely on how do we engage more Californians in service and volunteerism and civic engagement, and really try to mobilize Californians across the state to help us solve some of our biggest problems. And Governor Newsom is very, very passionate about service and volunteerism and civic engagement. And so he launched Californians for All, which is a brand new initiative right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was because at the start of the pandemic, we saw that not just were there huge needs that our communities were facing for the first time, we saw a massive spike in the food insecurity and the food banks. At the same time that there's a big drop in volunteers because of the stay-at-home orders. We saw a massive need for blood donations. We saw a massive need for supporting students who had to study at home. So just as we saw these big needs develop, we also saw people wanting to step up, wanting to help out, wanting to help their neighbors, wanting to be part of the solution in a really challenging time. And so the idea of California's Fall Initiative was to try to create the opportunities with the call to action from the governor on down for people to step up and make a difference, help their neighbors. And fortunately, we have incredible partners like L.A. Works, where we can channel that energy that people had to take action.
That's fantastic. And my understanding is that California Volunteers and the Californians for All initiative really acts as like a statewide aggregator for agencies of service. But really, I'd like to know sort of what sets Californians for All apart from other service providers.
Yeah, so I sort of think about this, and forgive me, I'm a military veteran, so I tend to think about things in one way. But I sort of see organizations, incredible organizations like LA Works and other volunteer organizations around the state as really leading the ground effort on this work. And they're sort of the troops on the ground doing the really important work. And I see us at the state level as being like we're the air power. So we provide the air cover, the air support, and we're way up here looking at things from high above and trying to support in any way we can the critical work that's happening on the ground, that's happening in communities, that's happening in LA, and is being fought every day with LA Works and other organizations. So that's how I sort of think about it. Again, forgive the military frame, but I think the idea is we're all in this together. We're all collaborators. And really what Governor Newsom has tried to do for the first time through California Volunteers is say, how can the state play a more intentional role in supporting the really important work that's already happening on the ground? And how do we get more people to feel like they're part of something bigger? And can the state can California play a role in supporting that? We think that we can. We're trying a lot of new things. We're learning a lot. And some of this comes down to also just resources. This is the governors for the first time and the legislature have actually put in resources from the state general fund to support volunteer activity. That's historic. And that's because of his commitment and vision. And what that allows us to do from the state level is, again, support the really, really important work that's happening on the ground with groups like LA Works.
So I'm curious to know what kind of opportunities are offered by Californians for All, if you guys really are sort of, as with your military reference, sort of the aggregator, but also the one who makes the announcements of the volunteer opportunities. How does this set you apart from, say, other organizations that are trying to leverage and promote volunteering?
I think maybe the only way it separates us apart from the great work that's happening on the ground is that we have a statewide perspective. So we can look at and see what are state priorities, what from a state level. And again, the impetus of the Californians for All initiative was the COVID-19 pandemic, which was the first time that literally all of us, every single Californian, was impacted. And so we had to look at volunteering from a statewide high level because literally everyone was impacted by it. And so what we're able to do, I think, at the state is identify state priorities, identify whether, and that could be everything from responding to COVID-19. It could be responding to the climate crisis as a state. It could be responding to learning loss in our schools, especially in our low-income populations as a state. But really thinking about what are the state priorities? What are we as Californians, as a whole community facing? And then what can we as Californians as a whole community do to be part of the solution? And then again, once we are able to identify those areas, then we can work with the people like LA Works and others on the ground who are able to execute the actual work.
I think that you mentioned, for instance, what's new about this is that you're putting real resources and support behind these initiatives. Do you see yourself sort of as a leader in the nation around volunteerism and these initiatives to get behind volunteer power?
We certainly hope so. It's Governor Newsom's hope and vision to always be trying to lead the nation, not just because we like to, but because we need to. We feel at California Volunteers that, and as does LA Works, that volunteering and service is so critical. But unfortunately, we all know that you can't just tell people to go volunteer and it happens. You actually have to invest in resources. You have to build the infrastructure. And I think there's a really strong argument that for generations, maybe since, back since JFK, maybe, we as a society haven't invested it to the extent that we need to the scale that we need to, in building out our volunteer infrastructure and building out our service infrastructure to really engage our people in solving real problems and coming together in communities. And so what we're trying to do, the reason that Governor Newsom created a cabinet level position for service, the reason that he's invested for the first time ever state resources into California Volunteers, is to really try to create a model, not just for Californian, but for the country, to say, we have some really big issues. We have some really big problems to solve. And there is no way we're going to be able to solve those if we don't figure out how to activate all of our people and mobilize them to volunteer and take action and make change in their communities. So we're certainly proud of what we're doing. Other states are doing some really important work too, but we're going to continue to try to lead.
And what do you think the main initiatives are that you're really trying to get behind? I know, for instance, for LA Works, we're focusing on food insecurity and the climate crisis and the unhoused and educational equity. What initiatives are you really trying to push by supporting the local cadres to implement throughout the state, excuse me?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned several of them, but the initiatives that we're really pushing that we think about from a statewide level are critical for our entire state, but also obviously affect people in communities on the ground. Are the things like the existential climate crisis that we're facing. It's why we launched the Climate Action Corps, to say that, yes, we can pass big policy, we can lead on really important issues like promoting electric vehicles, which we're doing already, but it can't be policy alone. We actually need people to take climate action in their individual lives and in their communities. So we created the Climate Action Corps, and we're working with LA Works to collaborate around getting more people in LA to step up and take climate action in real ways, because we're not powerless in that fight. There's literally something every one of us can do to help be part of the solution for climate change. Food insecurity. We saw a massive spike in food insecurity during the pandemic, and that's not going away. We're seeing it with inflation now. People are living on the razor edge, and food banks is often the thing that keeps them from going under. And so we're going to have to keep thinking about how we're supporting our food banks and Meals on Wheels and other organizations doing great work around food insecurity. And then, of course, we know that there is growing and also historic, sadly, historic inequalities when it comes to economic inequalities, racial inequalities, and economic inequalities. And so where that manifests itself is in homelessness. It manifests itself in a growing disparity of education between the low-income students and higher-income students. And so these are real issues that we as a state have to grapple with. And what Governor Newsom believes, what California Volunteers believes, is if we're going to solve them, we can solve them, but it's going to take all of us. And so that's why these collaborations with LA Works, collaborations with other volunteer organizations are so absolutely critical, because it's the only way that we as a state move forward together to tackle some of these really big issues.
Yeah. I know at LA Works, we look at volunteerism in sort of a different way than a lot of other people. We think that if people are empowered, not just to volunteer, but become real educated advocates for what's happening in their state, we have a real opportunity to change the future. So sort of with that in mind, what is your hope for the partnership with LA Works and Cal Volunteers for the future?
Yeah, well, let me first by saying I love how LA Works thinks about volunteerism. It's cutting edge. It's really leading the nation. LA Works has led the nation for a long time, but with how you're thinking about how taking action in your community to systems level change is so important, is so critical, and it's exciting. So we support you 100%. We're excited to work with you in collaborating on that. And our hope is that people come to recognize through largely the work that LA Works is leading, come to recognize that one, volunteerism isn't just something you do because it's nice to do. It's something that, like, in a democracy, we actually have to do. That being an active citizen, being a responsible citizen, and being an active member of the community doesn't end at the ballot box. It can't. It simply can't. Democracies can't thrive that way. And so we need people who are understanding that, one, they need to take action, but then how their actions tied to bigger policy, bigger systems change. That's really important, and that's just critical for a democracy to function. And then again, if we're going to actually solve some of these big problems and make change, volunteerism is how people start. It's how people take that first step. And the message that first step is critical, but it's not enough, you got to keep going from there, is also just a fundamentally important message that I'm excited and hopeful we're going to be able to show great success with and keep building from there.
So I kind of want to ask an obvious question that you've answered quite a bit, but I'd like to see if we can kind of succinctly say, sure, why is volunteering important?
Just generally?
Just in general, why is it so important? You know, you've spoken about how it's a component of being an active member of our city, our state, our community, our democracy. But what is it? Why should Californians want to give back?
Volunteerism is so important because it's how change happens. It simply is. It's how change works in our society, in a democracy. And yes, it's important because it makes people feel good. It's important because it keeps you connected to your community. We have a lot of health statistics that shows the health impact of volunteering. But at the end of the day, if we want to see change around climate change, food insecurity, education, and economic and racial inequalities, we need people to take action and step up. That's volunteering. That's saying that you care about your community enough to take your time to do something about it, to make it a better place. And that's fundamental for a thriving democracy to work.
So I think you've made a case for why we should all get involved in our community. But the question is how? How do we join this initiative?
Well, that's the beauty of the collaboration between Californians for All and LA Works. You can actually sign up to be part of a really important and critical cadre of volunteers that we call on when we have needs and when we need people to step up. So simply go to californiansforall.ca.gov or to LA Works website and sign up to be a Californians for All LA Works cadre member. We need you, so step up today.
Well, Josh, we are so excited to be partners in that vision of yours. And we are so thankful for you and the governor and your firm belief in volunteerism, because without you guys, I don't know if LA Works could make the difference that we do in our city every day. So it's so significant that we have your support, the state level support. And I just really want to thank you for that.
Well, we're just proud to call ourselves partners of you. So thank you.
Thank you.